Okay, good morning, everyone. So in the last class, we have discussed about the embryology. So from today, we will be continuing about the lead. So today we will discuss about the applied anatomy of lead and few congenital malformation of eyelid. So in this picture, you can see the eyelids and its structures. So we have a upper lid, lower lids, and along with the lids, we have a medial canthus, which is present in the medial side, and lateral canthus. And this is a lacrimal caruncle, and this is a plica seminularis. So this part we will discuss later in the conjunctival part. So today we'll be discussing about the lid. So lid, what type of structures is the lid? It is a very thin fold of skin that covers and protects the human eye. So eyelids are mobile, flexible, multilaminar structure that covers the globe anteriorly. So its main function of the lid is to protect against injury and excessive light. So whenever there is a slight trauma or any excessive light outside, so there is a reflex mechanism, automatically the closure of the lids occurs, which protects the eyeball. It also helps to distribute the tear film evenly over the surface of the cornea, so which helps to keep the cornea moist. So the movement of the lid opening and closure of the lids will cause a continuous spread of the tear film over the surface of cornea and collects the tear and propel them to the medial canthus, where they enter the lacrimal drainage system. So as a tear is from the different glands. So mainly from the lacrimal gland, which is present at the upper and lateral side. So through the tear film, this tear is passed through the medial canthus and it's drained. So how the tear is drained, we will later on discuss in the following chapter. So in the last class, we have discussed about how the eyelids and glands are developed. So with the beginning of the 6th week, that is 6 to 8 weeks, there is a 8 to 11 millimeter of stage area where a small group or depressions develop in the surface ectoderm. And immediately above and below that, there occurs a fold which rapidly deepens and forms the eyelid fold. So in the surface ectoderm, there forms in the either side, there forms this fold. So eyelid folds grow towards each other and laterally. So they grow towards each other and laterally. At 8 weeks, they are united. And by the 5 months, they start to separate and other cilia and granular structures are developed. And 7 months, the complete separations occurs. So as a fold adhere to each other, evolutions of the cilia and glands continue. The orbicularis oculi muscle contains in the fold in the 12th week, and ciliary glands, that is gland of mole and G's, grow out from the ciliary follicles, and tarsus gland, which is called the meibomian glands, which develops at the column of ectodermal cells from the lid margin. So the surface anatomy, we have the structure, different structure as superior palpebral sulcus. So in the figure, you can see the superior palpebral sulcus, inferior palpebral sulcus, lateral canthus, medial canthus, and eyelashes and palpebral fissure. So here we will discuss about the palpebral fissure. So it is an elliptical opening between the eyelids of 27 to 13 millimeter long and 8 to 10 millimeter wide. So this is a palpable fissure between the openings between the two eyelids, upper and lower eyelids. So its width is about, or you can say in this way, its long is about 27 to 30 millimeter long, and its height is about 8 to 10, 11 millimeter wide, or it's up to 15 millimeter also. So in forward gaze, the upper eyelid just overlaps the cornea. It closer, it covers it. So what happens is that always the upper eyelid, it covers about 2 millimeter of the cornea. The corneal surface is over here, the scleral surface is not seen. It is covered by the upper eyelid, and in the lower eyelid, it just touches the lower part of the cornea. When these upper and lower eyelids are not covered, or lower eyelid doesn't touch, there is a show which is called the scleral show, or it can see in some conditions like exophthalmos. So lower eyelid just below the cornea where the eye is open or closed, merely reaching it. So palpable fissure. So palpable fissure is important. Its height measurement is very important. We will say these things are important in case of proptosis and also in the case of ptosis. So we have to measure the palpable fissure height. So where you will measure the palpable fissure height? So at this area, at the center of the pupil, you will put a scale and you will measure this palpable fissure height. And if you will put the scale over here, it will not be accurate, or over here, it will not be accurate. So always there will be at the center of the pupil. The landmark is important here. Lateral canthus. It's acute, about 30 to 40 or 60 degree with the lid wide open. So 5 to 7 millimeter medial to the orbital margin and 1 centimeter from the frontozygomatic suture. So lateral canthus is in contact with the globe. So this is in contact with the globe. So some surgical landmarks are important for the surgical point of view. This frontozygomatic suture. So lateral canthus. Medial canthus, it's more obtuse. So continuous medially into the wrist formed by the medial palpable ligament. So medial canthus is separated from the globe by the lacus lacrimalis, which is the tear leg. So over here you can see the lacus lacrimalis. So it is not being attached to the or overlying the globe. It's little bit separated from the globe by over here the lacus lacrimalis. So eyelashes, they are arranged in 2 or 3 irregular rows along the anterior dormal edge of the eyelid margin, and usually longer and more numerous on the upper eyelid than on the lower ones. So eyelashes sweeps the airborne particles from the front of the eye, and constant voluntary and reflex movement of the eyelids protects the cornea from injury and glare. So this is functions of the eyelash. Meibomian gland, approximately 25 in the upper eyelid and 20 in the lower eyelid. So meibomian glands, how many meibomian glands are there in the upper and lower eyelid? So these are very important, because when we will discuss about the calagion and stye, then you will come to the meibomian glands, why there are multiple calagions. So this is all due to this gland, abnormalities of the gland. So there are 25 to 30 numbered in the upper eyelid, meibomian gland, and 20 in the lower eyelid. So it originates in the tarsus plate. Both the eyelash and the meibomian gland differentiate during the 2nd month of gestation from a common pilosebaceous unit. So this dual potentiality explains why following the trauma or chronic irritation, the last follicles may develop from the meibomian glands, which is called the acquired dystrichosis. Similarly, if present since birth, it is called congenital or dystrichosis. So this trichosis is the misalignment of the eyelashes. It is not a entropion or ectropion, which is the enrolling of the lid margin, inward enrolling or outward enrolling of the lid margin, but rather it is a misalignment of the lashes. So it's a trichosis. So this trichosis is the extra row of the lashes, so which can be congenitally present or it can be acquired dystrichosis. So acquired dystrichosis is following the trauma or chronic irritations. So what are the structural anatomy of the eyelids? So it's divided into the distinct segments from the dermal surface inwards, and these segments include the following structures. So we have a skin, eyelid margin, subcutaneous connective tissues, orbicularis oculi muscles, orbital septum, LPS, molar muscles, tarsus, and conjunctiva. So these 9 structures is very important for you. So you should know how to describe these 9 structures and what are these 9 structures of the eyelid. So from the skin and subcutaneous tissues we will discuss. So it is the skin. What is the peculiarities of the eyelid skin? So it is the thinnest in the body and contains a fine hair, sebaceous gland and sweat gland. So superior eyelid fold is present near the upper border of the tarsus, where the levator-aponeurosis establishes its first insertional attachment, and subcutaneous tissue is loose and rich in elastic fibers and contain no fat. So this is the peculiarities of the eyelid skin. These are very thin. They contain hair particles or a fine hair, and they are loose, but there is no fat. Absence of fat. What is the clinical significance? So skin, it's difficult in match grafting because of the extreme thinness, usually from the posterior side. So auricular regions or supraclavicular regions and medial side of the arm where we take commonly this graft. And edema occurs very fast in the skin due to the looseness of the subcutaneous tissues, which permits the accumulations of the blood or fluid. And some inflammatory conditions also occurs as there is a looseness of the subcutaneous tissues and a very thin skin. So dermatitis, dye, and there is a, in other passive conditions also you will see the swelling of the eye. So coming to the eyelid margins, there are several important landmarks in the eyelid margins. The small opening, the punctum of the canaliculi, where superior or inferior is present. So we have a superior punctum in the upper eyelid and the inferior punctum in the lower eyelid. So in case this punctum cannot be seen easily, we have to just pull the lid little bit to see the punctum. It is aligned to the globe, which helps the passage of the tear to the lacrimal drainage system. Intermarginal sulcus, which is also called the gray line, and anterior to this the eyelashes are present, which you can see in the picture. Anterior to this is a gray line, and you can see this is a gray line, and you can see just anteriorly the eyelashes. Behind these lines are the opening of the tarsus or meibomian gland just anterior to the mucocutaneous junctions. So just behind the gray line, you can see the small openings, hole-like things. This is a gray line and this one. So this contains a gland of G's, which are modified sebaceous gland associated with the cilia, and the gland of mole, which are apocrine sweat gland in the skin. So these, what type of gland are these? Where are these situated? These are the frequently asked questions in Calagian also. Now coming to the orbicularis oculi muscle, it is a complex striated muscle sheath that lies just below the skin. And these are flat and elliptical muscles. It's divided anatomically into three parts, that is the orbital part, preseptal and pretarsus part. So you can see in this pictures orbital part of the orbicularis oculi muscles. This is a preseptal portion of the orbicularis oculi muscles, and the pretarsus, superior pretarsus part, that is above the tarsus or within the tarsus, is the superior pretarsus portion of the orbicularis oculi muscle. So orbital portions, it overlies the bony orbital rim. So that is why it's called the orbital portion of orbicularis oculi. It arises from the insertions of the frontal process of the maxillary bone and orbital portion of the frontal bone and the common medial canthal tendon. So it involves in the forceful eyelid closure. So orbicularis oculi helps to close the eye, and the muscle which helps to open the eye is LPS. Palpable portion, it overlies the mobile eyelid from the orbital rim to the eyelid margin, and the muscle fiber sweeps circumferentially around each eyelid as the half ellipse, fixed medially and laterally at the canthal tendon, and is divided topographically into two parts, preseptal and pretarsus part. So preseptal portions of the orbicularis oculi originate perpendicularly along the upper and lower border of the medial canthal tendon. So where is medial canthal tendon now? So this is the medial canthal tendon, and this side is a lateral canthal. So the preseptal portion, these fibers originate perpendicularly along the upper and lower border of medial canthal tendon, and fibers arc around the eyelid and inserts along the lateral horizontal raphe. So pretarsus portion, it overrides the tarsus plate. Its fibers originate from the medial canthal tendon by the separate, superficial and deep heads arc around the lid, means it encircles the lid and insert into the lateral canthal as a raphe. So contraction of these fibers, which aids in a lacrimal pump mechanism. So it helps the drainage of the tear film. So as a tear is formed from the lacrimal gland, it passes medially and it drains into the lacrimal passage. So these fibers contractions helps to pump the mechanism. So if any person in the old age or due to the trauma, if there is a dehiscence of these muscles, which result in the watering of the people. So even after the lacrimal drainage system is patent, if you do the syringing or if the draining system is correct, but if the pump mechanism is disturbed, then a patient will have a watering complaint. So it has a very important role. And orbital septum, which is also a very important structures for you all, especially both for practical and viva. So this is a septum which separates the intraocular eye content from the extraocular part. So any infections beyond this is a intraocular spread of the infection. So it is a thin, fibrous, multilayer membrane that begins anatomically at the arcus marginalis along the orbital rim. It separates the eyelid from the content of the orbital cavity. So any spread of infection, it prevents any infection spread beyond this orbital septum is called orbital cellulitis. So insertion, it's about 3 to 5 millimeter above the tarsus plate, but it may be as much as 10 to 15 millimeter above it. and it fuses with the capsulopalpable fascia several millimeter below the tarsus in the lower eyelid. So another lower eyelid protector muscles is the capsulopalpable fascia. So it is attached to it. So superior orbital septum and inferior orbital septum and its attachment. So weak areas in the septum orbital determines the site of herniations of the orbital fat. Such herniations are frequent, especially in the old people, and it acts as a barrier to prevent the infections from passing from the eyelid into the orbital cavity and vice versa. So orbital septum, besides spreading of the infections, any herniations of this orbital fat, in case of, we will see in case of very fat person or in old person, there is a swelling like over here hanging something, you will see. These are called the blepharochalosis. So this blepharochalosis is due to the herniation of the orbital fat. So it acts also as a barrier for to prevent the infections from spreading from the eyelids into the orbital cavity. So it has very much clinical significance. Pre-aponeurotic fat pockets. So it's anterior extensions of the extracorneal orbital fat. Its important landmark for the surgeon is identifying the eyelid retractors. So upper eyelids are medial fat pad and lateral fat pad, and the lower eyelids are medial fat pad, central fat pad, and lateral fat pad. So it applied expector since the medial and central fat pads of the lower lids are separated by the inferior oblique muscle. It may be injured by excising the fat during the blepharoplasty. So during the surgery of this blepharochalosis, so if we give during the incision, we can injure these muscles. Now coming to the levator-palpebrae superiorlis muscles, it originates from the lesser wing of sphenoid bone, overlies the superior rectus, and it travels anteriorly towards the eyelid margin. So Whitney's ligament is formed by the condensations of the tissue surrounding the superior rectus and levator muscles. So together the levator muscles and tendon, so the muscle has a tendon also, which length of about 50 to 55 millimeter long. So it's a long muscles, and the muscles which elevates the upper eyelids is 40 millimeter long. It's innervated by the superior division of third nerve, and its function primarily as a suspensory support of the upper eyelids and superior orbital tissues. So you can see in this picture the levator muscles and the Whitney's ligament with the condensations of the thing, and it has got the levator aponeurosis part. This is the medial horn, lateral horn, and so it has got 5 insertion, different site of 5 insertion. So the course of LPS aponeurosis forms 2 horns. The aponeurosis insert into the anterior surface of the tarsus and passes by the medial and lateral horn into the canthal tendon. So if it's difficult for you to remember the horn, you can remember the canthus, medial canthus and the lateral canthus. So medial horn and the lateral horn. So these fibers, they passes into the anterior surface of the tarsus. It also runs towards the tarsus and divides into anterior and posterior portion. So at the border of the tarsus muscle, it divides into anterior portions and posterior portions. So the fine strings of aponeurosis insert into the septa between the pretarsus orbicularis muscles and skin. So if you see in this picture, so this LPS muscles at the tarsus plates, it divides into anterior border and posterior border, posterior part, and the anterior portions of the aponeurosis, it inserts into the pretarsus orbicularis and skin. So thus it forms a groove of the skin and fold of the skin. And the posterior portion insert firmly approximately at 3 mm from the margin onto the anterior surface of the lower half of the tarsus. So the aponeurotic attachment also exits with the conjunctiva of the upper fornix and the orbital septum. So posterior portion is firmly attached to the 3 mm from the margin. So another important muscle is a molar muscle, which is the smooth muscles, which is sympathetically innervated muscle, which originates on the undersurface of LPS muscles in the upper eyelid. And the similar smooth muscles arise from the capsulopalpable fascia head of the inferior rectus in the lower eyelid. So the similar muscles of the molar muscles in the lower eyelids is the capsulopalpable fascia, which is much weaker, attached to the lower border of the lower tarsus, attached to the upper border of the upper tarsus and to the conjunctiva of the upper fornix. So it provides 2 mm of elevation. So it provides a less elevations, and peripheral archeal arcades is formed between the levator aponeurosis and molar muscles. So what is the clinical significance? The paralysis of the LPS will result in ptosis or loss of the horizontal furrows, and paralysis of the superior tarsus muscles will result in Horner syndrome. So tarsus plate, which consists of the dense fibrous tissues of about 2 mm thick, that impart the structural integrity to the eyelid. So tarsus plate is very thick at the upper eyelid. So it is 2 mm, and at the lower eyelid it is 1 mm. So you will see the upper eyelids more thicker and firm, and the lower eyelids is more thinner. So the defect of this thickness of the dense fibrous tissues thickness in the upper and the lower eyelid is, in the upper eyelid you can see the you cannot see the entropion, the senile entropion. When we will discuss the entropion, that is a inward rolling of the lid margin, so which is not so common in the upper eyelid, whereas the senile or the spastic type of entropion is very common in the lower eyelid, because of this thin fibrous tissues present in the lower eyelid of the tarsus plate. So horizontally it is 25 mm, and central height it is 8 to 12 mm in the upper eyelid and 3.5 to 4 mm in the lower eyelid. And medially and laterally they taper to 2 mm in height as they pass into the canthal tendon. So meibomian gland of about 25 in upper eyelid and 20 in lower eyelid, they are present at the tarsus border. They are the holocrine secreting sebaceous gland that are not associated with the Lasch follicles. So the orifice lies just in front of the posterior edge of the lid margin, just marks the junction between the skin and conjunctiva, and the vertically arranged tubes with long central canal surrounded by 10 to 12 acini. Its secretion prevents the overflow of the tear by its hydrophobic properties, and it prevents the tear from macerating the skin, and due to its hydrophobic properties, it prevents from the macerating of the skin, and after blinking leaves an oily film over the tear to retard the evaporation. So the clinical significance are, there are different type of dry eye. So in the tear film also we have the mucin secretions, we have the aqueous, and we have a lipid layer. So the absence of this layer will result in deficiencies of the lipid type of the thing. So it helps that lipids will keeps the moist and also the oily film in the tear, which also prevents the evaporation. So the arterial supply of the eyelids comes from the two main sources: the internal carotid artery by the way of ophthalmic artery and its branch, and the external carotid by the arteries of the face, that is the angular and temporal. So its arterial supply is very important in the eyelid. It has got the dual arterial supply, that is both from the branch of the internal carotid artery and external carotid artery. So this anastomosing between these two systems throughout the upper and lower eyelid, they forms two arcade, that is a marginal arcade at the margin and at the peripheral arcade. So it has got both the advantages. So any type of trauma, the healing occurs very fast. But disadvantages is that any type of surgery, there is a profuse bleeding because of this dual arterial supply. So marginal arcade anastomos between the superior and inferior medial palpable arteries and superior and inferior lateral palpable arteries in the submuscularis arteriolar tissues 2 millimeter away from the lid margin. So peripheral arterial arcades in the upper lids forms the superior branch of the medial palpable in front of upper margin of the tarsus plate, and lower eyelid often has a one arcade located in the inferior tarsus border. So this figure and the arterial supply is sometimes important for you in your theory part also. In a practical, they will frequently ask these questions. So during the eyelid margin surgery, incisions should be given 2 millimeter above the lid margin to avoid the damage to the marginal arterial arcades. Or due to the highly vascular lid structure, there is a prompt healing of the wound as well as better control of the infection. So it has got advantages and disadvantages also. This is a clinical significance. Venous supply, it's by the superficial and deep. Superficial, which drains into the internal and external jugular vein, and deep system flows into the cavernous sinus. So innervations, sensory supply of the upper lids is mainly by the supraorbital, assisted medially by the infratrochlear and supratrochlear, and laterally by the lacrimal nerve from the ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve. So in last class also we have discussed. And sensory supply of the lower lids is by the medial angle by the infratrochlear branch of the ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve, and remainder part by the infraorbital nerve and terminal portion of the maxillary division of trigeminal nerve. And lymphatic drainage from the eyelid parallel the course of the vein. Two groups of lymphatics exist. So medial group and lateral group that drains into the superficial preauricular lymph node, and swelling of the lymph node is a diagnostic sign of the several external eye infections, including the adenovirus conjunctivitis and the Peyronie's oculogranular syndrome. So in case of a very common type of conjunctivitis in our clinical practice is the adenovirus conjunctivitis. So you can see the many people saying that something lump has come in the either side of the ear. So it's a lymph node enlargement. So you should be able to check the lymph node also in case of conjunctivitis also. Now, some of the common congenital malformations of the eyelid. So these are the blepharophimosis syndrome, congenital ptosis of the upper eyelid, and congenital ectropion, uriblepharon, and chyloblepharon, epicanthus, epiblepharon, congenital entropion, congenital dystrichosis, and congenital coloboma. So most congenital anomalies of the eyelids occurs during the second month of gestation because of the failure of fusion or an arrest of development. So congenital anomalies of the eyelid may be isolated. That is, you can see only the congenital anomalies in the eyelid or associated with other eyelid, facial or systemic anomalies. Or you can see the eyelids and other ocular structure anomalies also, or you can see with the face or other systemic anomalies also. So always if there is any one congenital anomalies in a person, so in a patient you should be able to see, you check on whether there are other congenital anomalies regarding that. So epicanthus, it's a vertical fold of skin that extends from the upper or lower lids towards the medial canthi, usually bilateral, and affected child may appear isotropic. Isotropic means eye moving medially and exo means eye moving outward. So there are 4 types of epicanthus. So you can see the in this child you can see the skin fold over here. So this is a epicanthal and the eye looks slightly towards nasally. So tarsalis, inversus, palpebralis and superciliaris. So no need of this, just you remember epicanthus is a medial fold. Now telecanthus, it's an increased distance between the medial canthi due to the abnormally long medial canthal tendon. So you will have a medial canthus here, and this there is a medial canthal tendon. So due to this long medial canthal tendon, there is abnormally long medial canthus. So may occurs in isolation are associated with blepharophimosis and some systemic syndrome. So telecanthus is usually associated with blepharophimosis syndrome, and there can be a surgery like shortening and refixing of the medial canthus tendon to the anterior lacrimal crest or insertion of the transnasal suture. So blepharophimosis syndrome, ptosis, and epicanthus inversus syndrome, which is also called blepharophimosis syndrome. It is an autosomal dominant inherited complex of the eyelid malformation, where you can see moderate to severe systemic ptosis with poor levator functions. So telecanthus, epicanthus inversus, and other minor facial anomalies like lower eyelid ectropion secondary to vertical lid deficiency, poorly developed nasal breeze, hypoplasia of the superior orbital rim, loop ears, and hypertelorism. So this is a epicanthus inversus along with the blepharophimosis. Epiblepharon, it is a comprise an extra horizontal fold of the skin stretching across the anterior lid margin. So we have a lid margin, lower and the upper, and you can see this lid margin, the one fold of skin is there. So commonly in the individual of the eastern. So epiblepharon is a common condition which we see in our ethnicity, especially in a Gurung Mogar type of ethnicity also. And usually in children we see this epiblepharon and it goes along with the age. Usually treatment is not required. If it persists till the older age, then we do the surgical correction. So congenital entropion is a upper eyelid entropion. It's an infolding of the upper eyelids. It's usually secondary to the microphthalmus, which causes a variable degree of the eyelid inversion. And lower eyelid entropion is generally caused by maldevelopment of the inferior retractor aponeurosis. So you can be confused with the trichosis and the entropion. So entropion is the infolding of this lid margin, and the lacis touches the globe. In case of trichosis, the lid margin is intact, but only this cilia are misaligned, and those misaligned cilia will dot the globe. It involves the excision of the strip of skin and muscles, and sometimes a surgery is required. Congenital coloboma, so it's a gap. It's an uncommon unilateral or bilateral conditions which can be partial or full thickness of the eyelid defect, and it occurs due to the either failure of the migration of the lid ectodermal or to fuse the lid folds, or to mechanical forces such as amniotic bands are there, so it results in this condition. So small defect involves the primary closure, and large defect may require the graft to close it. So it can be the upper eyelid coloboma and lower eyelid coloboma. So upper eyelid coloboma occurs at the junction of the medial and inner third. So relatively strong associations with the ophthalmos, facial abnormalities, or golden hand syndrome. So it's a quite common MCQ questions. The site of the upper eyelid is medial third, and its association is with golden hand syndrome. And the lower eyelid coloboma occurs at the junction of the medial and outer third, and frequently associated with systemic condition. So cryptophthalmos, it's a rare congenital anomalies in which the eyelids are absent and replaced by continuous layers of the skin. And euryblepharon, it refers to the horizontal enlargement So there is a this palpable, this is increased in the lateral side. You can see the lateral ectropion, that is the lid margin is reverted outward. And mycloblepharon is a small eyelids with associated with anophthalmos. So if the eye is small, you can see the eyelid. And ankyloblepharon, which occurs in upper and lower eyelid, are joined by the thin tag, and most cases are sporadic. Treatment involves the transections with scissor. Anesthesia is not required many times over here. So sometimes these ankyloblepharon people, it's very difficult to do the intraocular surgery. So even by putting some arterial forceps, we just exercise this. So this is not important. Disorder of the eyelashes. So we see the trichiasis, dystrichiasis, poliosis, madarosis, and trichomegaly. So trichiasis is a misdirections of the cilia with normal position of lid margin. Dystrichiasis is abnormal growth of the lashes from the orifice of the meibomian gland on the posterior lamella of the tarsus plate. Poliosis is a premature graying of the cilia, and madarosis is falling of the cilia. Okay. So this is about the anatomy of the eyelids with applied anatomy along with some congenital anomalies. So you have to do the homework. So to read all those things, these are my book from where I made the slides, but you can at least go through it, Khurana and Parson. This Kansky is just to see the picture for you, and Parson, if you will read once and say that, ma'am, I have finished reading, then you will not understand anything. So you read Khurana, then again you read Parson, then again you read Khurana. So till my next class, you have to read this very nicely. Otherwise, I will not repeat this section again, and I will go to Calagian. So you have to know this. Okay, thank you everyone.